Oh, here we all are. Some of us arrived yesterday, some this morning. And arrival is always a very important experience. Because when we arrive in a new place, there is the impact of that place. It's the possibility of experiencing ourselves in relation to the world. So that rather than starting with a fixed sense of self, well, I was in my own home and now I'm here, which becomes the ceiling self-referential attitude, we just allow ourselves to feel what it's like to be here and what happens to us when we're here. So we really see, oh, I arise in dependent origination with the environment. As part of the environment, the world speaks through me. And my illusion of a separated identity can start to dissolve. So maybe we begin with some sitting practice. People here have different backgrounds, so maybe you can just do some quiet sitting for half an hour. And you can do that with shamatha practice, focusing on the breath, or you can relax in space without a focus on any particular object. Whatever allows you to feel settled and here. So we meet here to explore the nature of our own mind. Clearly, in order to arrive here, we have to be people. We have to be a person. And to be a person is to make choices. We go this way or that way. We're faced with accepting and rejecting as we build up images of ourselves and come into formation through this activation of making choices. But when we study the Dzogchen text and we get the transmission, we see that the mind itself is free of choice making. So how do we find the relation between the pattern formation, which is a necessary part of our participation in the world with others, in which we manifest in the unique specificity of our individual temperaments, the kind of food we like, the colors we wear, the kind of holiday we might want. There's a particular patterning that feels like me. So that's not going to change. You can turn that into a problem and say, well, but if the mind is infinite, I shouldn't be limited. But of course we are limited. The body has certain capacities. We become tired, we have to sleep, there are some things which are really disagreeable for us. Other things are very agreeable for us. So how to bring the patterning of our experience into relationship with the openness of the ground of being, or the openness of the mind itself. This is really the issue in Dzogchen. This is the central point of non-duality. That all patterns, all formations from the very beginning have been inseparable from emptiness. That is to say, the shaping of the pattern, that is, you like some kind of music and not others, you like some kind of food and not others, these specific patterns which have an impact on you, which feel friendly or unfriendly, harmonious or disharmonious for you. All of these possibilities are without internal essence or substance. What you have is a relational vibration or resonance, in that some things sing sweetly and other things are disharmonious. They don't have compatibility. But that's not because there are two internally defined true entities which clash and bang into each other. It's just a pattern formation. So, people here will listen to different kinds of music. Some kind of music you wouldn't want to dance to. Even if we're all dancing to the same music, people dance in different ways. This is ourselves. This is the expression of the patterning of energy. The question is, where does the energy come from? When we manifest, we can feel, I'm manifesting me. I'm just me. This is how I am. How are you? So this shaping which I seem to have seems to be the showing of some internal defining structure. And so every time I make choices or act on the world, I'm getting a kind of feedback loop which confirms, oh, this is me. This is exactly what I do. Or, God, I don't know why I did that. That's not like me. So there's some kind of template, some kind of shape portfolio which helps us to recognize I'm being me or I'm being a bit strange. I'm straying away from who I think I am. This feedback looping helps to maintain a kind of rectification, a righting, a resettling into myself, because we think, oh, I want to be authentic. I want to be true to myself. I don't want to live in deception and hypocrisy. I want to ring true. I want to have a clear note that that's just me. And from the humanistic point of view, that's our best shot. That's the highest goal, to live truthfully. From the point of view of Dzogchen, the problem with that, although ethically it's not a bad stance to take up, the problem is that it's about the externalization of attention. That we're keeping an eye on ourselves. We're monitoring how we're doing. We're trying to think, trying to examine, do I live up to my standards? Should I be doing something better? Could I correct what I am running as my ordinary daily life? Do I need to apologize to other people because I've made a mistake? So, myself as a pattern and the world as a pattern requires a kind of ongoing vigilance to bring about the best possible meeting, the best or most harmonious rapprochement, engagement time. And of course, if you spend your life looking out through your senses, there's a lot to look at. Because our situation is embedded in impermanence, the forms and structures of the world are always changing, and so there's always a lot to do. And once we were young, and now some of us are getting quite old, and then we will die. And most of our life is spent in moving around these patterns of manifestation, trying to get it right. But of course we can't please all the people all the time. We please some people some of the time. And when we please one person somehow, without intending to, we've upset someone else. So the main focus in Dzogchen is to try to just tilt the focus of attention back from what we see, what we hear, and on an inner level, what thoughts arise in our mind as a kind of indication of who we are. Instead of looking at the object, whether it appears to be outside or inside, we now want to focus on the subject. Who is the one who eats, who walks, who smells, who tastes? Some experience is arising. Who is the experiencer of that experience? As we know very well, we can all tell lots of stories about that. We can invent and develop and imagine all kind of narratives about the meaning of our lives, whether they go well or not. We might think we've made some mistakes in our lives and have regrets about them and so on. There's endless things to say, because there's endless things to think, and because of thinking and saying, we're committed into endless doing. And so this is, from the Buddhist point of view, this is the engine which is driving rebirth. That when you die, there is a pulsation of a self-looping, self-referential, self-reflexive quality of consciousness that takes on another shape, finds itself in another pattern factory. Clearly, animals have patterns. They do things in a particular way. Rabbits, through their embodiment, move in a way different from squirrels and different from sheep. So when you look around the world and you see the different kinds of birds, you can see some manage a kind of walking, others just do hopping. Some birds really don't like to be on the ground very much. You see, oh, their particular context, their particular situation leads them to a repetition compulsion. Sparrows do sparrowing, blackbirds do blackbirding. And that's what they do. We human beings have more choice, and so we're not so much species directed as individual directed, but we have the same issue of repetition compulsion. We regenerate, rebirth ourselves through doing more of the same. That's essentially what a stable personality is. Somebody who can perform consistently so that other people can have a identification of that person and their patterns without too much difficulty. People who are stuck in a rut are very lovely because they're no trouble. People who jump about a lot are much more disturbing. People who are depressed sit at home and don't do much. People who get a bit manic, now you're moving into trouble territory because they go out and get a bit crazy with sex and drinking too much and start to cause trouble. Depression is better for the other person. Because we like object constancy. We like predictability in people. Because if I know who you are and I can predict roughly how you're going to be, I don't need to be so vigilant. I've got you slotted. And this is a very important aspect of our psychological functioning, that we are lazy. We are very, very lazy. We seek complacency. We want life to be sorted, because then it's easy. If there's a lot of turmoil around, it's much more difficult. If you imagine that you're living in Syria, in this terrible, endless fighting goes on, you never know what kind of plane is going to come into the sky, whether a helicopter is going to come and drop barrel bombs. You don't know what people are going to come into your town and what their intention is. So it's the levels of anxiety in that environment are terrible. It's so unpredictable. That is the real horror of war. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody can say. That's why we always pray for peace. Om Shanti. We want to have peace. We want some kind of tranquility, which on a general level is a beautiful and wonderful thing. The shadow side of the tranquility is the predictability, which then allows us to fall asleep in our own life. So the middle way is to have a degree of disruption. For many people, the progress in Dharma, in spiritual awakening, comes about with a kind of trauma. The breakup of a relationship, the death of a parent, becoming unemployed, becoming sick. These moments kind of create a lesion or a tear, which makes us think, whoa, what's it all about? What's it all about? And if these events hadn't happened, it would just be business as usual and we'd be going on. So, if you like, meditation is a way to effect that kind of new perspective without having to induct some kind of trauma. It's a very gentle way of resituating our identity of the one who is seeing, the one who is knowing, so that we ease ourselves out of our formalized self-position, built up on our notion of who we are, our identity, our history, and start to explore, well, what is the ground of my being? When I talk, where does the talking come from? When I eat, where is this eating movement coming from? Is there someone inside me deciding and doing these things? Or do I find myself doing them? Does my conscious apprehension, my taking hold of an understanding of what is going on, does this arrive after the fact? Because I'm already eating, I'm already walking. So in that sense, our experience precedes our interpretation. So that's samsara, is when we're stuck in that situation. We're always trying to work out what is going on. And you see that with animals. The farmer's always trying to find a way to trick the animal, to get the animal into the cage so that they can get them from the cage into the truck to take them to the abattoir. Because they don't want the animal to cause trouble. The animal, if a big bull's got a sense of, hey, you want to kill me? But somehow we can trick that person. We can trick that animal. But if you're lulling and you're reassuring, don't worry, that's the way to do it. Makes the meat taste better too. Anxious animals to give bad meat. This is the ghastliness of our life. So, how do we find the open ground in a way which allows us to relax and be less defended in a world in which we might well have to defend ourselves? Samsara is not safe. We're lucky, we're living in Western Europe. At the moment we don't have any war, but in the background all kind of unpleasant people have seized power in our countries and are determined to be in charge or even masterful, and that puts us all in danger. Because the discourse of winning and losing is becoming very powerful again. In the Dzogchen text it says that the beginning of samsara is polarization. And the basic polarization is self and other, inside and outside, and that escalates to friend and enemy. And we can see that politically across the world, friend and enemy becomes a very, very strong framework, and the vibrations are incredible. More and more money goes into military development of new kinds of weapons. And it seems to be ethical to kill our enemies. So this kind of thinking easily takes people over. Because once you start saying that people are terrorists, then by definition, terrorists cause terror. If they cause terror, I need to be afraid of them. I want them to stop frightening me. What's the best way to do that? Well, I can't change them because they are terrorists. So I have to kill them. No, there are many countries dedicated to the annihilation of others. Because if I get rid of my enemies, then I will have peace. This is the logic of duality. Because subject and object are not truly apart. It is as if they are apart. Duality is a delusion. Because we are always interconnected, if you move, I move. And if I don't like the way you're moving, and your moving is affecting me, I want to control your moving. So we can spend a lot of time in this. People do it in their relationships or with their children or at work with colleagues who are all the time trying to manipulate and make the patterns which are most agreeable to ourselves so that our anxiety level goes down. But if we're resting inside our ego identity, which is a dualistic identity, that is to say, I as an individual am connected with you as an individual, how can I have peace if you keep moving? So object constancy is a blessing. If only everyone followed the rules, life would be better. That's why all across the world people seem to be voting for strong leaders. Strong leaders who will control the bad people and protect the good people. And the very interesting fact is that the bad people are always somebody else. The bad people are never me. We don't go knocking on the door of the president and say, I confess, please kill me. I'm a troublemaker. We say, no, shoot these fuckers, not me. I'm a nice guy. So always we're projecting the cause of trouble into other people. Now, of course, as soon as we start to meditate, the fantasies that we have that we are a nice person start to dissolve, because we see in a more immediate way what's arising in our mind, and it's usually not so sweet. All kinds of thoughts arise, most of them pretty selfish. Oh. So liberation is not going to come by sorting out the bad people and removing them. What we have is complexity. My own mind is complex, complicated. I am not all of a piece. I am not just one thing. I'm a polyphony. So many voices and aspects and tendencies move through me as they move through everyone else. So in this field of incredible complexity, how do we find any kind of peace and tranquility? Because your complexity can easily trigger aspects of my complexity. Controlling myself, controlling the other person is not going to work because we are beyond control. It doesn't mean we are out of control, but we are beyond control because there are so many variables manifesting, so many unpredictable variations. How could we be in control? Nobody here knows what kind of thought they're going to have even 1 minute ahead. We don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to arise in your body as sensation in 1 minute's time. We don't know. So the metaphor or the paradigm of control is very, very harmful for us, but we return to it because it seems to be the best option inside the domain we find ourselves in. And in Dzogchen it's pointing to another kind of way of experiencing being present in this existence. That instead of mobilizing to change the patterns of the world, we want to see what is the ground or the basis out of which these patterns arise. Both patterns in the subject, in myself, and in the field around me. Where do things come from? What is the origin? Now we are very used to tracking origins through history. We can study archaeology, paleontology, and find about when the dinosaurs were there, and we can look in cosmology and see the origin of the planet and the gas gradually solidifying. There are many, many stories about origins. There are biblical stories about origins, and most traditional cultures in the world have stories of how the world began or how our people came into existence. So we can tell ourselves a story about who we are, that we came from our parents and our parents came from their parents and so on, back many, many generations. So we have family lineages that can be reinforced with ideas of genetic inheritance and the organizing function of strands of DNA and RNA. But these are stories. These are conceptual formulations. What is the actual origin of ourselves moment by moment? Where do we spring from? Because clearly we are dynamic. At the moment I'm talking, so you're listening, but inside your bodies, sensations are going on. You are a living dynamic system which is unfolding, and you don't know how it's going to unfold. So where is all this movement and emergence arising from? If you take a kind of linear cause and effect line, you can relate it back to, oh, I have a pain in my back, that's because I had an accident when I was on my bike. You can find some kind of causal sequence which links everything inside relative formation. And now you know something about why your back is sore. This is a story you tell yourself. And you take this pain to the doctor, and the doctor is an expert in stories about pain because they spent 7 years medical training learning many kinds of stories. So your story meets their story, and together they put something together and they write a prescription, which is another kind of story. Because that goes to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist takes the medicine which is developed in the pharmaceutical industry, which is a whole set of complicated stories. Everything is stories. Whether you're dealing with the food you eat, the complexity of this agro-business, international commodity trading in vegetables and so on. There are stories and stories and stories. Our world is made of stories. Is that all? Is that all? Well, Dzogchen would say no. Who is the storyteller? When we speak, when we think, when we walk, where is the sight of this arising from? Now, we can pose the question as, who is the one who is doing this? Which is a useful question, but its very formulation can evoke the sense of, I am doing it. So we have to be very careful not to slip back into this naive and banal answer, which seems meaningful, but which on investigation is actually rather meaningless. I am speaking. Well, what are you going to say? I don't know. So what does it mean to say I am speaking? You seem to be the owner or the master of speaking, but actually speaking is coming through us. So I am the vehicle of speaking. Okay, so who's doing the actual speaking? I don't know. It just comes up. Oh, where does it come from? So this is the focus of the meditation that we do. And the reason that we don't do elaborated forms of meditation, is because we're not trying to construct something, but rather to remain in open receptivity so that the patterns of emergence can reveal themselves. And in that moment, the focus is not on the interpretation of the pattern or the reaction to the pattern, but rather on the energetic emergence itself. So say, for example, you're sitting in the practice, just relaxed and open, and some thought sequence starts to emerge, maybe about someone in your family or at work, and something you're irritated about. So involved in this is a kind of tension that starts to come. You're starting to fixate on what is emerging. And one thought leads to another. Because I don't like what they did. So there's a memory of what somebody said, and that's just an echo. I don't like it. The thought is being energized by my attention to it, and now we've got a kind of mutual reinforcing. The energy of the subject feeds the object. The identified status of the object hooks further investment from the subject. I can't stop thinking about what you said. That's a normal thing that people say. Why did you do that? I couldn't sleep last night. Why would you do that? Oh, I am agitating myself because I think that what you say must mean something. I don't know why I said it. I just said it. I'm sorry if it upset you. That's not enough. Why did you say that? I don't know. Fuck you. No. Why would I want to be with somebody who doesn't know why they say what they say? Huh? But none of us know why we say what we say. We live in this persecutory fantasy that we are rational creatures and that somehow we know what we are doing. We find ourselves doing. So again and again, we have to relax the desire to make sense of what is going on. This is the real litmus test, or the real clarifying point between going into the spiral of samsara, which is the domain of fabricated meaning, meaning that you create by the combination of different factors of interpretation, and in the other aspect, the immediacy of the clarity that it is what it is. And what is it? So what is it is so precious for us because it's already here. It is what it is. Yeah, but what is it? Let me tell you what it is. And so we turn in the other direction and we start our narrative account, our conceptual elaboration, taking this little fresh moment and wrapping it in our interpretation. So here we have the difference between the raw and the cooked. The raw is fresh and vanishing. It's always vanishing. But the cooking, this is slow cooking. Slower even than you'll find in Milano. This is very, very slow cooking. It can go on for years and years as we bear grudges, as we remember what you said. And it goes deep through us. And in that way we compound, we build up, ever elaborating pictures which also have increasing density. We know what the French are like, we know what the Turks are like, we know what the Scottish are like. We have endless prejudices built up of little vignettes from the past. And this comes in as a very quick kind of knowledge. So we'll do quite a lot of meditation in these days together. And the key point is to watch how you cheat yourself by falling asleep in the thought. Thoughts will give you meaning, but the kind of meaning that they give you is enclosed, it's encapsulated, it's a sealed world. So, if you think of the various kinds of prejudice which have been made more conscious in the last 150 years, we have more consciousness now about racist attitudes, about anti-Semitic attitudes, about denigration of women attitudes. We can see all over the world that groups develop prejudices. And we see how completely limiting it is to other people's existences if they're trapped inside a prejudice, whether it's against homosexuality, particular sexual orientation, or a desire to live in poverty, or a desire to make a lot of money. We have all kinds of strong views about patterns. When I have a strong view, I feel powerful because I know something definite. I can get the number of that person. It's very bad that people do these things. Whether you think Mr. Putin is good or bad is an opinion. Some people like Mr. Putin, some people don't. Is he good or bad? It depends. It depends. Nobody's entirely bad. You may have a political decision that a certain small man born in Linz is very, very bad, and if you say he's good, then you get in trouble. But is he really bad? Some people liked him. Oh, that's because they were caught by his magnetic personality. Some people liked him. Nothing is entirely good, nothing is entirely bad. That's why our world is complicated. That's why you can't work out who is the good guy and the bad guy. So how do we live with complexity? We have to see that the conceptually based interpretive schemas that we use, how we make sense of the world, how we construe it, how we put it together, is inadequate for the job. That we construct interpretations which do not have sufficient validity. So, for example, when we had big development of plastics from these side products of the oil industry in the first case, there was a lot of extra stuff made in the production of oil, and you could transform it and make plastics. Plastics were an amazing thing. Everywhere there was plastics. People wanted plastic surfaces in their house. It was very easy to clean. And now, later, we see, oh, the fish in the sea all have little bits of plastic in them. There's plastic everywhere, and it's not a good thing. But at one time it was a really good thing because it was cheap and cheerful and brightly colored and really useful and easy to mold. This is something wonderful, and now we think, shit, this is really toxic, it's spoiling our world. The savior becomes the demon. And you can see that in the area of food. Butter is good for you, no butter is going to kill you. What can you trust? People say, oh, if you have arthritis, you shouldn't eat any vegetables that came from South America because da-da-da, gives you... Then you read another book and another book and another book. It's all ideas. Ideas. And there'll be some truth in the idea and some things which are a bit more obscure. So this is what it means when it says that conceptual elaboration is the engine and the fuel that drives samsara. That our world is made of thoughts. It's made of interpretations which formulate as narratives. We talk about the world. And this is the main force that we have to face when we do meditation, because we sit in a meditation and our mind as a field of stories and grasping and accepting and rejecting continues to pulsate. How do we relax out of that? Well, you can't relax as an intentional focus. This is why we study the view or the ethos or the orientation of Dharma, in our case particularly Dzogchen, because the view helps us to have a more open perspective in which we start to see that what we had taken to be our friend is not necessarily our friend, or rather, our friend is useful in certain situations and not in others. If you want to function in the world, you absolutely have to have a skill in moving concepts. You wouldn't be able to earn any money unless you could elaborate some kind of, whether you run workshops or you work in a bank, you're dealing with narrative structures. You have to be able to participate in that story, accommodate the patterning of your thoughts and your way of speaking, so that you seem like an intelligent, helpful person to other people. Otherwise, nobody's going to give you any money. It's not that the thoughts are the enemy. It's the fact that the thoughts function well in certain areas of existence, but not in terms of clarifying what is our true or actual identity. That is to say, if we exist through telling stories about ourselves, we remain in that gap of aboutness. Because there is the direct presence of here we are, and that's true for each of us, and then we have the story about us. So the story wraps itself around us, and we see the story, not the directness. So when we do the practice, it's not to blame the thought. It's not that the thoughts are bad or out to get us or the enemy. They're not obscurations. We just have to see we don't need them. We don't need them. So, we all suffer from psychobulimia. We like to binge on thoughts and then we puke them out after a while. So, if you imagine that these pattern of thoughts are like an endless series of large slices of chocolate cake. A little is quite good, but a whole chocolate cake, that's getting kind of extreme. So, when the thoughts are arising in the mind, do you need them? What do you need them for? The function of the thought is to bring you into relation in the domain of duality. That's what thoughts do. They link us subject to object, object to subject. I think we all know this to be the case. So if I merge with the thoughts, if I entertain the thoughts, it will keep me operating on that bandwidth, because that's what they do. They are the kind of guarantors of our understanding that the world is constituted out of many different things, and some we like and some we don't like, and so we construct our personal world. That's what they do. That's not bad in itself. We can't be in the world with others without that. But when we want to see what is the ground of these thoughts, the thoughts are structurally incapable of telling the truth about themselves. Because the thought says, I'm something. That's why you want me. I'm something. The thought can't say, I'm nothing. Because the thoughts only survive if they can hook enough interest. And if they say, nothing here, okay, fuck off. I want you to love me. I'm really special. So, if you like, your mind, when you meditate, is some vast dating website. And each thought is arising, posing with a nice little best aspect. I'm a fascinating person. So that's why we get sucked into the thoughts, because they're maintaining our familiar sense of self. You don't have to stop the thought, but you don't need them for the purposes of this project. When you go swimming in the sea, you might have a snorkel and little flippers to put on your feet, but if you go walking in the hills, you don't need a snorkel and you don't need flippers. You need climbing boots. So what are we going to give privileging to in the meditation? Non-involvement. Relaxed. The more we can see nothing to do with me, allowing the thoughts to self-liberate, to go free by themselves, which of course they always do. If the object is nothing to do with me, then the subject starts to be revealed in its true form. As long as the thought seems to be something to do with me, I incorporate the appearance of the thought in my persona, in my presentational self, and then I have that constructed sense of identity. So releasing on the object allows the subject to go free. Releasing on the subject allows the object to go free. I don't need the thought. The ego needs the thought. The ego is our site of participation in duality. The ego composes itself, constitutes itself out of patterns of thought, feeling, memory, and so on. So if I don't merge, if I don't identify, if I'm relaxed, it's just patterns moving through. Now I'm more relaxed. I don't need them. And the more I see I don't need them, we start to see, I really don't need them. I really, really don't need them. And then we start to see what the texts say when they say, the mind is complete from the very beginning. This is Dzogchen Chimpo, the great completion. The mind is complete, self-sufficient, not dependent on anything, uncompounded. Oh, I'm just here. So awareness, presence, which is free of intrinsic content and which requires no grasping at contents to fill itself up, because it's at peace, contented, satisfied. This awareness has no problem with allowing the interactive thoughts of participation in the world to arise. So then we see how primordial purity, or the empty nature of the mind itself, is non-dual or inseparable from all the forms which arise as we participate in the world. Because these forms are arising out of emptiness, they are illusion. Illusion doesn't mean something vague and hazy, it's extremely precise. Tea doesn't taste like coffee, which doesn't taste like orange juice. Each phenomena in the world is redolent in color, smell, shape, and so on. But it's not held in that form by its own internal self-definition. So this is a rough overview of what we want to start to focus on. What is the ground or the basis out of which experience is arising moment by moment? And the key thing is to be very kind to ourselves. Sometimes meditation seems to go well, sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes we might be interested in what's going on, sometimes we might seem bored. However the mind is, allow it to be as it is. If you go into judgment about yourself and say, I would be better if I was more like this or more like that, then what you're doing is manifesting your inner duality, your inner subject and inner object. I have to control myself so that I don't do that. This is what you learn in childhood, in which we carry on all of our lives to get to work on time and pay the bills on time and so on. We are self-managing. Self as object is being shaped and molded by self as subject. In this inner dialogue, this inner dualistic structure parallels subject and object functioning in the world. So in our practice, we're not trying to correct the mind. We're not starting with any template or regulatory structure that helps us to see, oh, this thought is intrinsically truly better than that thought. There is no truth in the value in the thought. It's always projected. Some people like some things that we don't like. They really, really do. Some people like food we wouldn't eat. Some people like music we wouldn't listen to. And some people want to vote for dictators. Some people become soldiers and they're quite excited with the idea of putting a bayonet in someone. Personally, I wouldn't like to do that. But some people do. How do they do that? Because of the patterning of their mind. Oh, but it's much better to help people than to harm them. On one level, of course, that is true. But I want to help people and I want to harm people. It's very similar grammatically. I want to do this or do that. I want to eat oranges. No, I want to eat bananas. I want to help people. I want to kill people. Grammatically, it's the same. Subject onto object. we attribute particular value. If someone is, invading your country, you might be quite glad to have soldiers who are willing to kill on your behalf. You might be, like me, a hypocritical meat eater who is quite happy for other people to work in the abattoir so that I can have a kebab from time to time. I don't particularly want to cut the throat of a goat. I really don't want to cut the throat of a goat. But if somebody's cooked some goat curry, I'm quite happy to eat it. So we need to know our own deviousness, our own mental cheating, the games that we play in order to not confront ourselves with the fault lines in the fabrication that we have of ourselves. It's not that you suddenly have to think, oh, from this day onwards I will never ever do that, because that kind of New Year resolution usually doesn't last very long. Much more important is to see, oh, these are mental structures and they are intrinsically limited. They cannot be the whole story. So as long as I construct my life on the basis of concepts, there will be limited validity to what I believe in and what I act on the basis of. So the first thing we need to do is start to be more curious about how we are. And the best way to do that is to be kind to ourselves, not to judge ourselves, but just to gently see, oh yeah, liar and cheater, full of funny stories. Okay, let's see the nature of these funny stories. How do I cheat myself? How do I cheat other people? What image of myself do I want to present to other people? Because it's not that we are uniquely bad in doing that. This is how the game of samsara arises. So if we want to see the intrinsic wholeness of ourselves, what we need to do is to recognize how we fragment ourselves by hiding one bit of ourselves from another. We split ourselves, and through that self-splitting maintain the split of the world. And if we're saying Dzogchen is complete from the very beginning, means never fragmented, never split, never divided, then all the fragments are allowed. All the fragments are already within the great completion. So if you take a harsh, judgmental attitude towards yourself, you're endlessly trying to separate out and make hierarchies of value. And then, how will you see the whole if you're endlessly moving all the little bits around? So you just have more and more complicated patterning of fragments. Of course, in the world we need to make ethical choices, which involves a degree of self-regulation. But for the point of view of the practice, we relax and open. Okay, we're going to take a break in a moment, so I just want to go over some of the practical things about here. We have food at 1 o'clock and at 7 in the evening, and we are quite a lot of people. So, and some of us have to help to tidy up in the kitchen with the plates and so on. So it makes sense if you find out if you're going to do some of that kitchen duty and you go and get your food first so that you're ready to begin. And also if you can, it's very good to chat when you're eating, but just have a sense that some people have got to get all the plates and help to get them washed. So we want to operate as a collaborative community in which we're a bit thoughtful of how the whole system functions and what our part in it is and how we can operate not against ourselves but with an awareness of how we can make life easier for others. So when you're choosing the food, if you can do it a little bit quickly, to stand for 2 minutes deciding soup or not soup is not necessary. We're going to work a little bit on the text by Padmasambhava. It's very short. It's a chapter from the book Simply Being. Does anybody have a copy of this?
No.
How many people have a copy with them? Okay, no, do it the other way. How many people need a copy so we can Xerox it? How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot.
A lot.
So we need to get a lot of copies. Probably 40. Yeah, okay, we'll get 40 copies made. So the other thing is I have a new book which has been translated into German by Leah, who is not here today but should be here tomorrow afternoon. She's, I think, done a really good job, and but very generously she is open to receiving feedback on the translation, because one of the qualities we want is supportive collaboration. So the books are available for 15 euros, which is pretty cheap. But we would invite you, if you can, if you read it through and you see anything in the translation that seems a little inharmonious or is not very clear, then I put her email address there, and she's very happy to receive any comments in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then we can reprint it, because we're doing it print on demand, which means it's not, we don't have 1,000 copies stored. We can fine-tune the translation. And I personally am very happy with this, because translation is hard work, and finding the right words, it's a terrible burden for one person. So the idea that all our minds can move towards making some kind of Dharma ideas more available, more acceptable, that's a beautiful thing. The text we're going to look at from Padmasambhava outlines the intrinsic basis of our existence, and then he indicates how we lose touch with that. And there are many different styles of giving this explanation in the Tibetan tradition. But just as a preliminary to that, if we return to this idea that the mind is open and pure from the very beginning, but this is ignored. The ignoring is not done by a bad person. It's not a personal straying, it's that ignorance arises and gradually thickens and congeals like jelly. And then it takes on a seeming substance. And this is the world that we find ourselves in. And the question then, well, what is the glue? Is the glue in the subject or the object? And this is something we each have to investigate about ourselves, because for each of us, some objects in the world are very, very powerful. Some people have difficulty giving up smoking cigarettes, or difficulty not drinking too much alcohol, or eating too much, or working too much, or they might get an obsessional fixation on someone. And it appears as if I have to. That there is some power in the object which is calling me, and I'm responding to that call. Now clearly when we look around, we see that other people don't feel that call. They don't hear that. So in politics we could say, when people in the 1930s, many people became very interested in communist view, and they felt that that was the right view, certainly in Western Europe, and that people who didn't have that view had something wrong with them. Because anybody in their right mind would read the critique of the capitalist structure and would necessarily come to the conclusion that it was faulty and bad and should be changed or overthrown. And the people who were convinced by that view saw it as a self-evident fact. But it wasn't self-evident, because it wasn't evident at all to many other people who had a critique of that view. So you have that in your mind, you can see that we believe in things that other people don't believe in. Now that should make us start to think, oh, it's not the quality of the object that makes us believe in it, it's the relationship that we have formed with that particular object. And if we're thinking of material objects in the world, they don't make relationship. We make relationship. So we have a process which is operating in several phases. We project value into the object. Then secondly, we forget that we have projected the value into the object. Then we perceive an apparently inherent value in the object, and we respond to that value. So that's a very profound form of self-deception. Not only am I making myself stupid by imagining that this object which is shiny for me should be shiny for everyone else, but I'm ignoring the power of my own mind, which is actually the source of the shininess of the object. So this is why this projective disidentification is so dangerous, because it's the engine which drives the false inherent, which situates a truth in the object as if it belonged there. This is the inherent self-nature that we hear a lot about in Buddhism, that a tree is intrinsically a tree, a banana is intrinsically a banana, rather than banana is an idea that we have. And when the first Europeans were going to countries where they had bananas, they're kind of not sure whether to eat them or not. And you see some of the local people eating them, but local people are the people you should kill if you're a conquistador. So why would you eat what they eat? So it takes a while for people to realize, oh, we can eat this. And then gradually eating bananas becomes normalized in the culture. Eating mangoes now becomes normalized. And the normalization means that the projection that this is a safe thing, this is a delicious thing, this is something I want, seems to be in the object. Oh, I love bananas. Seems to be about the banana, not about me. I love bananas because they are delicious. But I love bananas because I love to love. Because my attention is selective. I don't particularly love these church bells, for example. For me, they are an annoyance, and if the Christians want to call people to prayer, they could hire a muezzin. But so here is something which has value for people in the village. Some will be Christian and it will be a reassurance. Others will just be familiar because it's always been there and it symbolizes that this is our village. Actually, it's a loud noise. And on the basis of the noise, we can project our value and interpretation. There is no value inherent or intrinsic to the noise, because it's noise and emptiness. But if I think, these fucking bells, then I start to see they are annoying. But they don't have any power to annoy, otherwise everybody would be annoyed by them. So I am annoying myself on the basis of the bells. So how do I do that? I imagine they shouldn't be ringing, or they're very loud, or they always seem to ring when I want to say something. Rivalry with the bells. So this sound What do we hear? Boing, boing, boing. We know it's the sound of the bell. We hear the sound of the sound. The bell is our interpretation. We know that this is the sound coming from the church tower where the bells are. That's a knowledge we are applying to the sound. The sound is not carrying the stamp of the church on it. You can buy some biscuits and you put the maker's label on them, or chocolates, stamp it, made here. But nobody's stamping the sound. The sound is completely virginal. It's untampered with, unmodified, just sound. But it's church bells. From us to that. Now I know it's the church bells. Why do they ring these church bells? So I can start to have all kinds of interpretations and opinions about the church bells. But what can we say about that? It's very emptying. The sound itself, if we hear the sound, just its sound, relieves us of the burden of hating the church bell. Because the sound is not the sound of the church bell. The sound I hate is the sound of my own mind hating the church bells, which I impute onto the thought. The cause of the trouble is me. It's not the object. Objects don't have that power. Now, that brings the center back to myself. I'm up to something. I'm up to dividing the world into what I like and what I don't like. What makes me happy, what doesn't make me happy. I do this. Everything in the world is open. People like things I don't like. Why? Because they have access to different constituting factors from me. I constitute the world in one way. They constitute it in another. With this open field of potential, my manifesting tendencies, habit formations, co-create with the potential the particular form which I experience. But the potential of the world is like a canvas. So I have my paints and I can start to make marks on the canvas. The canvas doesn't have any image in it. When we just hear the sound, it's there, but it's not there as anything. It's just naked. I wrap the sound in the clothing of my conceptual elaboration. I make the sound into something. Wow! I am at the center of my world. This is the key point of trying to see in this way, that I need to really pay attention to what I am projecting out. Because this is constructing the world that I perceive. It's not that the world is there. The world comes into existence through my participation. So this is the higher Buddhist and the Dzogchen view of the immateriality of the world. That the world is not made out of dead matter. You know, in school when we learn that matter is neither created or destroyed, there is this continuing matrix of energetic formation. From a Buddhist point of view, this is not true. It is the movement of the mind which gives rise to all the forms that we experience, which are elaborated into the 6 different realms of samsara. Patterns in their emptiness are not homogenized, they are not bland or tasteless. There is an absolute precision to the impact of phenomena. So if I look at the redness of the pillar and then I look at the whiteness of the ceiling, very different feeling tone arises in me. Red as a color, especially this sort of deep red, has an impact which the white ceiling doesn't have. It has a different impact. So colors, shapes, there is an immediate impacting, and so there is movement. What is it? It's the immediate non-dual swaying of the field of experience. So I am dynamic in a dynamic field. The dynamism of what I take to be me and the dynamism of what's arising are flowing together, mutually moving. Once you start to conceptualize it, the concept extrapolates, takes out certain features of this dynamic field and privileges them on the basis these are something I can apprehend, I can take hold of, and now I've got the building blocks for constructing my interpretation of what's going on and what I like and what I don't like. This is all my mental activity. And other people don't share it. This is the loneliness of seeing what happens to us as a consciousness cut off from the ground and cut off from the field. We don't know the ground of our own being, and we look around in the world at other people and we think, well, who are you? What are you on about? Eh? What are you on about? Huh? Why do people do what they do? You can live with someone for a very long time and think, who is this? In fact, the longer you live with them, the more that question. Other people are a great mystery. And of course, we imagine at first they're going to complete us or make us happy or do something. But after a while, we start to see, oh, there is an unchanging strangeness to others. And there is also an unchanging strangeness to ourselves. If we really start to see ourselves, we are quite strange. We don't really know why we do what we do, why we like particular things. So, you're not me. You're not like me. Am I like me? Am I a simulacrum of myself? Am I my own doppelganger? Because I stand in relation to myself. Who is the one who is me? Well, the one who is me is not one for a start. The one who is me is multiple. So the multiple me's arise in relation to the evocation of circumstances which I have projected as an identification. Wow. So in this very dynamic field, there's a lot to sort out. So again and again, when we see the movement of our mind and what it generates, there will be no peace until we stop the unnecessary activity. We suffer from excessive mobilization. There is, of course, mobilization that you need to do to go to the toilet. You have to wash your hands. You have to do lots of things if you go to the toilet. You have to know how to take your trousers down, put them back up, do the buttons and so on. When you're 3 years of age, that's quite difficult. When you get older, it's quite automatic. So we know how to mobilize and deal with tasks, but we have excessive mobilization. What is that in the service of? Why are we on the job all the time? Because we are fueling the illusory continuity of the individual ego self. The ego, I, me, myself, is an empty signifier. It has no content. if you don't fill it, it will be empty. For the point of view of people interested in Dharma, that emptiness is liberation. From the point of view of people wandering in samsara who want to exist, that emptiness is terrifying. So, our samsaric tendency is the ongoing process of continuously filling ourselves with meaning and value. We can do it in its negative form, with worry, with preoccupation, anxiety about old age, or money, or children, or relationship, or climate change. There's endless things you can worry about. Endless things. And we need these worries. We want these worries. Because they give us something to chew on. Dogs will chew on bones that have no nourishment in them. There is not one piece of cartilage or meat left on the bone. But they're chewing on it. And this is what, because it keeps the teeth going. And this is what we do a lot of the time. We are preoccupied, turning things over in our minds for the purpose of keeping the show on the road. Mental activity fills the ego. It's like blowing into a balloon. There's no way, at least with a balloon you can tie a knot in the end. But with the ego you can't arrive at a point, tie a knot, done. So, you see that if you go to a wedding. Here's the happy couple. Oh, everybody's so happy. Now they're sorted. It's not like that at all. The story goes on. The story goes on. You finish school, out of there, never going back. But now you've got to go into something else. So the ego is like that. It's constantly requiring filling. And it can be filled with happiness or sorrow, with thoughts about other people, with thoughts about ourselves. But it requires filling. So, diagnostically, this is very, very important, because if you examine yourself and you can see, oh, this is true. Like maybe you're on a train journey, you look out the window a bit, you might flick through a magazine, you look at the other people. You think, I could just sit here. But no, the mind is moving around. Like when I was on the plane, I was looking at the people, the different things that they were doing. People pick up the magazine, put it back, because aeroplane magazines are very boring, and then after 5 minutes they pick the magazine up again looking, because I want something to be happening. I'm stuck in a metal tube up in the sky. I can't go for a walk, but so make something happen. So it's not that we can just say, oh, that person's got a restless mind, so that could be a problem to be solved if they could calm themselves down. We have to see what is the structural function of that arousal. It is the absolute maintenance of the ego. The ego is movement. Movement which is searching for stillness. The ego always wants to arrive, to be finished, to be completed. But it's never completed. So the domain of awareness, unborn awareness, is called the great completion, Dzogchen. And the domain of the ego is the great incompletion. Because everything we do is one thing leads to another, and on we go. Excuse me. So if you get some clarity of your mind, in your mind, when you're sitting doing the practice, you can start to see, oh, I just spent 5 minutes in ego maintenance. Now, the thing is, the ego dies. As far as we know, whatever we've learned in this life is going to vanish when we die. Babies are clearly born with enormous potential, intelligence that can develop in many ways, but they don't come back speaking Russian or German or Chinese. They arrive as a potential. So the edifice which we have constructed with a lot of effort and suffering, the edifice which we now are, competent adults, able to do many things, to hold a life together, to find the money to pay the rent, and so on and so on. All of that will dissolve. Ego structures arise, and then they die. Some people's ego structures are collapsed a lot in life. Some people train in a profession and then they go blind and they can't carry on their profession. Some people go deaf and can't carry on. Some people are in car crashes and are in pain all the time, so they can't carry on their profession. Some people's lives are absolutely modified by some trauma that cuts across their existence. They become refugees. But anyway, even if we get through life without some of these major hurtful situations arising, we die and it gets washed away. So we are maintaining something which cannot ultimately be maintained. And at the same time, the Dharma says, we hope it's true, we have to find out for ourselves, Dharma says, awareness is unborn. That is to say, it hasn't come into existence as a phenomena in the field of temporal phenomena, the field of transient phenomena. It doesn't exist as a thing. It doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So awareness is unchanging, and the ego is always changing and is bound to collapse before it's recreated in the next life. So there we have two horses. We have awareness and we have our ego consciousness. They're running in the same race. It's the 3:30. We still have time to put our money on it. What horse do you want to bet on? You look at your own life. Which horse are you betting on? Which horse do you put your time and energy and interest and value into? It's the old horse that's going to die. This horse should be heading for the retirement home, not some galloping into freedom and truth and enlightenment. The old nag never gets to enlightenment. Not possible. We're betting on a bummer. So when you see that, so why would I do that? I sit to meditate and I spend the time following my thoughts. Why is that? It's not because we're bad or stupid or don't know how to meditate. It's because if we don't protect the ego gets thin. And if we're identified with the ego, we don't want it to get thin and fade away. I'm me, and I don't want to die, and I want to be healthy and happy, and I want to have an interesting life. And the best way that I know to maintain that is to eat lots of thoughts every day. The more thoughts, the better, because then you have a kind of balanced diet. It's like having a big multivitamin. More thoughts, the better. That is the discourse of the ego. We know this to be true. We don't like boredom. We don't like to feel useless. We like to feel that we can act in the world and be appreciated and make something of value. That's why meditation is difficult. It's not a moral failing. It's that you're investing your energy in protecting something which has a limited validity. And there is another option which has an infinite validity, but you don't know how to do it. But you do know how to do the thing which is not so useful. So I can be a competent member of samsara or an incompetent Buddha. Now, we like to feel competent. This is one of the ego's things. We like to feel, I am the one, I am the maker, I am the doer. So what can you do? I can make myself busy from morning to night. There's always something to do. Some people like to clean their house so that there's no dust. I personally am not worried about dust. I'm worried about people moving my papers, because I live with a lot of papers. So people who would like to dust where I live, I'm very wary of them. They cannot believe that I live in so much dirt. I cannot believe that they think cleanliness is so very important. What would you want a clean house for? What the fuck? Look in the summer, you see the light shining in the window. You see the amount of dust in the air? You want to get rid of it? Huh? You clean the air? Air dust extractor. It's silly. Dust is dust. Anyway, we all find something to do. I write lots of things on bits of paper and put them in piles. Other people dust the house. What's a better way to spend your time? This is how we pass our time. So this is a key thing. What are we doing that for? Of course we can tell some story. Oh, I like to have a clean, tidy house. My mother's house was all about. That's one story. Or I'm really fascinated by these ideas. I think it's very important. That's my story. What are we doing? The explicit content of the narrative is a story that reveals my profile, my personality. But the implicit dynamic of the activity is the self-maintenance of the ego. The reason I do this is to be me doing me, being me doing me all the time. It doesn't really matter what you do. You could buy old motorbikes and repair them. You could make your own guitars. You can spend your life doing endless number of things. What are you doing? You're doing self-creation. It's not that one shouldn't do that. It's that one just has to see, oh, I'm having to create myself because the self is always vanishing. This is the heart of impermanence. It's not just that the seasons are impermanent or the food in our stomach is impermanent. The ego itself, I, me, myself, is constantly being replenished by the offering of the subject into the world of objects. As long as I've got something to be engaged with, I give myself a rebirth. Here I am. Oh, now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. All day long from morning to night. If I don't do that, I won't exist. But because I had to keep creating myself, maybe it's a funny kind of existence anyway. It's not a self-existing existence, it's an artificial existence. So in this famous prayer to Padmasambhava, it says, Macha Tetra Lamacha Kiku. The Dharmakaya, or the mind of the Buddha, which is our own mind, is free of artifice and conceptual elaboration. Artifice means it doesn't have to create itself. We create ourselves. When you're a small child, your parents kindly help to create you. They tell you who you are. Parents are ceaselessly talking to small babies and saying, oh, you're so pretty. That's an interpretation. You're so pretty for me because I'm your mother and I'm stuck with you. And because I'm stuck with you, I may as well say you're pretty. Because if you start comparing your baby to the next baby, you think, oh, I'd rather have that one. So the parents are filling the child with their thoughts, with their projections, with their interpretations. And of course, it's a difficult thing as a parent because the child grows up to be someone else. The child starts to, like a snake sloughing off its skin, the child starts to excrete the parental impositions, all the introjects that baby had to make into itself in order to form itself. At a certain point it's saying, well, fuck you. I'm me, I'm not you. You want me to go and study this? I don't think so. I don't want to. Why should I? That's you, not me. Now, that's quite painful for parents, and of course it's very uncertain for the teenager, because they know I'm not who you think I am, but I don't know who I think I am. So it's a very wobbly time, and then gradually you become more competent as an adult, and you start to be able to tell yourself a story about yourself that you can believe and keep on the road, running on and on and on, because I'm me being me. It's all construction. It's all artificial. It doesn't mean it's wrong or bad, but it is not self-existing. It is not fundamentally reliable. Because if you don't keep the activity, it won't be there. It's like if you're in India on a hot day and you have a little fan. If you stop fanning yourself, you get hot. Then you fan yourself, you get a bit cooler. It's just like that. Coolness requires movement. You're keeping the coolness going by the movement. You're keeping your sense of self going by the movement of the mind. So, in the practice, we allow the mind to move. We can't actually stop it moving. We allow the mind to move, but we don't need the movement. The ego needs the movement of the mind to fill itself. Awareness doesn't need the movement of the mind. Because awareness is relaxed about being empty, because it sees emptiness as the basis of potential, whereas the ego fears emptiness as the annihilation of self. Does that distinction make sense? So we have the traditional example of the mirror. The mirror is able to show reflections because it doesn't have intrinsic content of its own. The mirror always shows something else. So this is given as a metaphor or example for awareness. Awareness shows whatever is arising. Whatever is arising is awareness because it's within the field of illumination of awareness, but it's not awareness because you can't say, I see a shiny tree and happiness arises in me, I am happy. That I am happy doesn't define awareness. It defines the self-construct which momentarily arises on the basis of the sunlight dappling through the tree. Awareness has no fixed content and is okay about that. So if it has content, okay. If it doesn't have content, okay. Consciousness, our ego structure is not like that. This ego self needs to have content in order to exist. It is content. And as we go into the text from Padmasambhava, you start to see that more clearly. I am who I say I am. I am who I think I am. Maybe we start to do a little bit more practice now. The basic practice we do is very simple. We just sit in a relaxed way. Relaxed means that the skeleton is holding the weight of the body, so the muscles can relax. This is a meditation without formal intention. We don't know in advance what is going to happen. We're not trying to visualize something, control our breathing. We're simply allowing whatever comes to come, whatever goes to go. And because it's free flow, like a stream running down a mountain, just flowing with the contouring of the rocks and the waterfall, and the wind moves it this way and that, just the mind is just tumbling, sometimes beautiful, sometimes ugly, whatever it would be. Because it's in free flow, you don't need to edit it or do anything with it. It's just occurring. Now, normally we're used to observing from a distance. I see the far wall of the room. I look out the window, I see a bit of a tree. I am here and I am observing there. When we sit to practice, be attentive to the tendency to locate the knower inside this body structure. I am in here looking out. That's an interpretation. That's a thought. What's arising? There's colors, the lights are shining. I can see the forms of people, and I feel my knees, I feel my feet on the cushion, I feel the curve of my spine. That's all interpretation. Sensation is arising. If I don't put the interpretation, this is the curve of my spine, there's just some transient formation and it's gone. Transient formation is gone. What I call I, me, myself, and which seems to be my stable ground, the site, the place from which I engage with the world, this is also transient. There is no security to the self. The self has no ground of its own. It fabricates its illusory groundedness by holding on to what is arising. So when you find yourself being here doing meditation, I'm sitting here, my eyes are open, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but anyway, nobody else is moving, so I'm not going to. Will this be over soon? So this is a lot of thoughts. You fall into the thought, and the wheel is turning. You let the thought go by, and it just vanishes. The meaning of the thought is revealed through participation in the thought. If you don't participate in it, there is no meaning. So, if you live in a big block of flats and the postman's lazy and he just bunches all the letters, there's a lot of letters, but they're not for you. Some of the letters might be love letters, some of the letters might be bills. That's not your name, not your letter. You don't need to open the envelope. So when the thought arises, is it for me? It looks like my name on the label, but that's because I've written my name on the label. The thought is meaningful to me because I've made that kind of thought meaningful to me by habitual repetition and investment. So I don't need to do that. So this is what we're doing in the practice. We're relaxing. If you just stick it on the table, thank you. Thanks very much. If you don't activate yourself in that way, the thought goes free. If you give yourself into the thought, you get infected with the meaning, you get filled with the meaning. This is your ego construction. So now we have this basic separation of awareness and ego consciousness. Awareness doesn't need thoughts for anything. Ego consciousness always needs thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, plans, in order to continue its felt sense of existence. So we have a choice. Merge with the thought, continue feeding the ego. Not merge with the thought, space. Open, empty space. I'm here, but I'm not here as somebody. What I call my body continues to manifest, but it's not me. It's available, it moves as energy, but it's not the site of my identity. I'm not somehow hiding inside this flesh frame. So the ego power dissolves by itself. You don't have to destroy the ego or get rid of the self. The self is a form of energy which is our communicative participation in the world with others. It's not an essential truth about who we are. Just holding this in mind when we sit, we can start to see what happens when we get pulled into thoughts. Again, it's not about blaming yourself or judging yourself or feeling you have to try harder, but simply observing what it's like to be a bit clear and what it's like to get entangled. And just keep observing, but as I say, not observing from here to there, but more, we're open as the luminous field, the infinite stage within which subject and object are always moving. The mind is the empty stage, the dharma dhatu, the open expanse of awareness. It's not located in the subject. It's not split off from the object. Subject and object are contained inside the field of awareness which is inseparable from emptiness. So whenever we find ourselves caught up in our subjectivity and judgments, don't try to jump out of that or do something different. Just almost in a very delicate way, just slightly tilt and be present with this formation that's arising. You started to merge into it. Don't discard it, but stay on the middle point. I'm here and this is arising. It may even seem to engulf you, but you are the stage, you are the space, and then it moves. Whether it's a depressed feeling, a happy feeling, let it come, let it go. Okay, so we do this practice for a while.